Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series is comprised of some of the most beloved and revered fantasy novels in the entire genre's history. But does it actually deserve that level of praise? Is Mistborn actually that good? Well, I just read the entire Mistborn trilogy and yeah, in my opinion, it actually is that good. I have a lot to say about what makes the Mistborn trilogy so unique, what makes Sanderson's approach to fantasy storytelling so unique. There are a lot of things that he does differently that makes Mistborn stand out in the way that it does. And I'm so excited to talk about it. But first, a word from our sponsor, who put those on you? You're a serious light. You know that, right? You are a serious light from serious readers, and you've got those bloody eyes on you. Do you know how silly you're making me look? Who put them on you? Tell me. Was it Lampington Jones? It was, wasn't it? Lampington Jones is at it again. If he can't steal my serious light, then what? He's just gonna make it look silly? Less serious? This is a serious light. Right, take those bloody things off. Lampington Jones thinks he can diminish the impressive power of my serious light, something that has changed my reading experience for life. With its sleek and beautiful aesthetic, with its adjustable lens and dimmer switch, with its weighted base and daylight wavelength technology, my serious light is the perfect reading companion. And all because of how incredible this thing is at enhancing my reading experience. I have found myself a nemesis in Lampington Jones, a man who really thinks that he can steal my light, and I'm not gonna let him. You and me, we are in this together, always. In all seriousness, serious readers have genuinely crafted such an incredible thing here. I love my serious light. The glow that she creates is like a world in and of itself. When I'm reading by the glow of my serious light, I am lost in the pages in a way that, thanks to my ADHD brain, I generally struggle to be. But she clears away the fog and creates this pure glow by which I am able to read and really lose myself in the fiction that I love. And if you'd like £150 off your own serious light, click the link in the description and use the offer code WILLOW to get a serious light of your own. Thank you so much to Serious Readers for sponsoring this video. Now, where are those googly eyes? Now, in order to really dig into what makes the Mistborn trilogy so special, it's not going to come as a big shock that I'm going to have to spoil things. If I'm going to talk about the second and third books in any kind of detail whatsoever, I will need to spoil how the first book ends and the new status quo going forward into the second book. But that won't come for a while. You're safe, and when you're not safe, I will warn you. I will give you a spoiler warning, and you can duck out if you like. But I do think that the way that the first book ends isn't a complete shock. I'm not going to spoil how the entire trilogy ends, so if you're someone who cares about spoilers to a point, but you can deal with some, it's a spectrum, I guess. I'm definitely one of these people. Then you might be okay to stick around. If you don't want to know anything about how the first book wraps up, when I give you the spoiler warning, duck out. Let's go. First off, a quick primer in case you haven't read it and you've been interested for a while, which was the case with me. What is Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn? What is this world? What is the situation? What is the story? What is the setup? So, the first book in this series is Mistborn, which was until recently called The Final Empire, at least here in the UK, and then at some point the name got changed. Anyway, Mistborn is set in a very dark and dismal world, a world where the sun does not shine, the sky is never blue, and the ground is coated with this perpetually falling ash. There are barely any plants to speak of, and a little bit into the first book, one character tells another that there are rumors that in the past, plants used to be green. So we know that this is a world of darkness, a world devoid of joy, light, or color. And why is that? Well, for 1,000 years, a man called the Lord Ruler has been ruling over everyone as an evil, despotic tyrant. The Lord Ruler has created specific divisions of people. There are nobles who live in cities or own slaves, and there are the slaves, known in this world as the Skaa. Outside the cities, the Skaa are slaves that work fields on plantations. And inside the city, the Skaa are an underclass. Sometimes they are criminals or beggars. And the Lord Ruler has existed for 1,000 years as a living god. Then there are the two protagonists of this novel. The first is a man named Kelsier. Kelsier is known as the survivor of Hathsin. Hathsin was a pit prison that he escaped from. And now Kelsier is trying to form a rebellion against this emperor and his empire. It is to a point reminiscent of something like Star Wars, and Kelsier is a beacon of hope for the Skaa people. Our other protagonist is a teenage girl named Ven. Ven is a Skaa. She was a street urchin. She was involved in violent gangs of criminals, and soon enough she is taken under Kelsier's wing. Why? Well, because these two protagonists are Mistborn. This world has a very unique magic system, which involves the act of ingesting different kinds of metals. There are, at least in the first book, 10 metals that can be ingested, and when you burn those metals inside of yourself, they temporarily create superhuman abilities that you can utilize. And there are two kinds of people that can utilize these 10 metals. You are either a misting, which means that you can use one metal, and each metal has a different property, or you are a Mistborn, which means you can use all 10. There is no in between. There is nobody who can use 2 or 3 or 4 metals. You either get one and you're a misting, or you get all of them and you're a Mistborn. Kelsier and Ven are both Mistborn. And throughout most of this novel, through the eyes of Kelsier and Ven, we get to know their fun band of rebellious characters. Throughout most of the novel, they are just getting to know each other. Kelsier is training Ven, and they are building a rebellion. They are spreading the word. They are trying to gather their forces to rise up against the Lord Ruler. The first novel in the trilogy is pretty focused on that mission. You only have 2 main protagonists and a supporting cast, and we follow them on their mission. Will they succeed? Will they defeat the Lord Ruler? We hope so. We're rooting for them. It seems pretty clear-cut. He's an evil tyrant, somehow a living god who's lived for 1,000 years, and they are an underclass of people who deserve to rise up and fight for their equality. In that way, Mistborn is a pretty simple book, but here's where the genius of Sanderson's writing comes in, and honestly, I might do a whole video just on this topic. Because as you go through the trilogy, and I'm not spoiling anything here, the world continues to grow and develop. Not just outward, as we go to new places and get to know more of the geography, but also inward, as we get to know our characters more, as they continue to grow and change and become different people. And, even more important than both of those, the world expands backwards as we get to know the lore and the history and the religions of this land. Sanderson's worlds don't stay still. They continue to develop and grow and expand. You are never done learning the lore, the culture, the traditions, the religions, the history, etc. of this world. All the way through the trilogy until the last handful of chapters, there are new things to learn, new revelations. And it works so well because Sanderson sets up a world where so many people are completely ignorant. Whether you are Skaa or noble, there are things you just don't understand. The Lord Ruler has crafted a narrative. He has outlawed all religions, except for the one in which he is the god. But there was a time before 1,000 years ago when he became the Lord Ruler somehow, when the world was a diverse place and there were more than 600 religions. And surprisingly, throughout the books, you get to know a lot about these lost religions and how they interact with each other, what they believed. What's so curious about this, and again, I'm going to do a full video on it, is that it's pretty well known that Sanderson is a Mormon. His Mormon faith put me off reading him for a long time. But then I started to read about how he approaches religion in his fiction, and I started finding myself with a lot of respect for him, and that respect has only grown as I've read the Mistborn trilogy. Sanderson has such a wonderfully curious and imaginative eye when it comes to religion and how it operates. He is fascinated by faith structures and also by the traditions of different religions and faiths. And throughout the Mistborn trilogy, we learn so much about them. You never stop learning. All the way through these books, you continue to understand more and more and more about this world. When I got to the end of the first book, I kind of had to take it on faith that it was kind of a minimalist thing, that there were things that I just would never know. I had so many questions about the world building, but Sanderson was just setting things up with a very focused and exciting narrative for the first book, only to then continue to expand all of these things and answer all of my questions as the books went on. I don't know if he planned this or not. It was Sanderson himself in one of his lectures who taught me about the two types of fantasy writers, the discovery writers and the planners. The planners have everything plotted out in advance before they even start writing. The discovery writers write and build as they go along, letting the story and characters guide them. I don't know which type he is. It's very difficult to tell, and there's no right or wrong. But whatever the case, Sanderson respects curiosity and growth and development and stitches all of that into his trilogy. So if you're someone who enjoys a good fantasy adventure, if you're someone who enjoys the political and religious machinations, as well as the magic systems of fantasy, the Mistborn trilogy will give you everything you've ever wanted. And just before I start talking about spoilers and going into details about books 2 and 3, I want to say one vague thing about the trilogy as a whole, which is that each book very much has its own tone and its own focus, to the point that each of these 3 books feels like it's part of a different subgenre of fantasy. As I've said, the first book is a specific journey that we take. There are 2 protagonists, they are part of a rebel faction, and they have a mission that they want to complete. Without spoiling anything, the second book has a very, very different status quo. It is more Game of Thrones-ish, in the sense that it is larger. The first book is mostly set in a single city, but the second book goes beyond that city. There are national and international politics at play. The second book is so focused on dialogue. There is a larger cast of characters, and they are all constantly chattering with each other and making deals. War is brewing. Armies are at each other's gates. It is very much about political machinations. If you think back to the iconic opening credits sequence for Game of Thrones, where everything is made of clockwork and all the cities rise up, and you see the cogs turning, symbolizing the machinations of politics and war, that's what the second book in the Mistborn trilogy, The Well of Ascension, feels like. And then the third book is also something else entirely, a book that is way more focused on religion than the first 2. Like I've said, Sanderson has a very wise and fascinating and open-minded approach to religion, an approach that is guided by curiosity. And in the third book, you feel that way more than in the first 2. It's a book about history and law and religion and traditions, and where we take those things moving forward. So each book has a different focus. The first book is a very, very narrow narrative. The second book expands into political machinations, and the third book has a more spiritual and historical focus. It's so impressive. And yeah, they are massive books, they are oversized, and a lot of people do say that nothing happens in these books, but I couldn't disagree more. There is always progress being made, and that progress isn't just linear. You're not just moving forward, you're also moving backwards, into history, into the textbooks, into the history books, and the songs and the poems and the traditions that have been lost under the Lord Ruler. And then you also expand outwards as the world world gets bigger and the fog starts to clear and the edges of the map get filled in. It only continues to expand, and you only continue to understand it more as the characters understand it more as well. Now let's get into some specifics about books 2 and 3. The vagueness can only go on so long. So this is your spoiler warning. From here, I'm going to talk about how book 1 ends and what kind of status quo book 2 takes us into. Leave now if you don't want to know anything. Ready? Book 1 does in fact end with the Lord Ruler's death. Vin kills him. But what's way more interesting than that is the fact that Kelsier dies too. And following on from Kelsier's death, he becomes a martyr for the people. Very, very quickly, a religion rises up around him. He becomes a Jesus-like figure for the people who now feel so lost without the Lord Ruler's guidance and control. That religion plays a role throughout the entire series, though not a major one. One of the most fun elements of the first book is Vin going undercover to a bunch of parties hosted by nobles, and one of the nobles that she meets there is a young man just 2 or 3 years older than her. She's about 17, he's 19, 20, and he's an arrogant, lazy son of a noble lord. His name is Alan Venture, and over the course of the first book, he is convinced to take up arms and side with her. After the Lord Ruler is defeated and Kelsier dies and becomes a martyr and the church rises up in his name, Alan is the person who becomes king of their city, with Vin by his side as his partner, both in a romantic sense and also kind of as his weapon. She is the most powerful Mistborn in the land. He is the political leader, but she is the sword of the Empire. And where do we go from here? Well, I've already said that book 2 has a very different tone from book 1, and it does because there are armies at the gates. One of these armies is led by Alan's own father, and he wants to take the city. He wants to take the throne. He wants to be the new emperor. He is here to fight for what he believes is rightfully his. And there's another king too. Another army appears at the gates. It's a stalemate. There is a painful political triangle here at play, and Elend somehow needs to navigate all of this, and as I've already said, there is so much dialogue between these people as they negotiate, as they plot. Subterfuge takes place, there are battles and assassinations, and as this status quo continues to shift, there is of course the titular Well of Ascension. The Well of Ascension is the thing that gave the Lord Ruler his power. At the end of the first book, we find out exactly what the Lord Ruler was, how he managed to live for 1,000 years. And it's because there isn't just one magic system in this world, but two, and the Lord Ruler was able to manipulate both in such a way that gave him this longevity and this immortality. But we still don't know what the Well of Ascension is, or where it is, or what it does. And so much of the second novel is about the Well of Ascension and trying to find it and use it. And I don't really want to spoil the end of the second novel because I feel like what I'm doing here at this point is just spoiling everything and just giving you a rundown of the whole trilogy. But to be vague, the second novel has an enormously twisty conclusion. It reveals something that shifts the entire status quo of the world and our understanding of how the world operates. Something changes. Something really enormous. Something that is ethically and morally fascinating. Even psychologically fascinating. And it leads into a third book titled The Hero of Ages that is, as I've already said, much more focused on religion, on theology, on history and traditions and folklore. The third book is about people versus gods, but that is both literal and metaphorical. Sanderson uses the third book to explore religion's place in our world, what religion does to and for people, what gods do, and what people do with their relationship to their gods. That's the entire third book. 700 pages across The Hero of Ages, exploring our relationship to religion and God. And it is so captivating. You tear through the third book as you piggyback off Sanderson's imagination and his theological ponderings about religion, about faith and gods, and what different gods mean to different people. And amongst all of this, there is a character whose entire existence is dedicated to the research and cataloguing of religions. Something the Lord Ruler did is eradicate religion. There are no systems of faith in this world, but there is a character who has learned about the 600 plus lost religions of this land and what they all believed. And as we go through the third book, this character becomes a larger and larger presence, as does his desperation to understand what is right, what is true, what is real. He allows this obsession to wash over him, to define him, as he desperately tries to understand what anything means, and if there even is a meaning, if there was a lost religion that actually got it right. And it's kind of like that bit in the first episode of The Good Place, where Eleanor asks Michael, what is the good place? Who got the afterlife right? And Michael says, well, everyone got it right in their own way a little bit, you know. Some of what this religion and that religion and the other religion teaches, they all had elements of the afterlife that were true. None of them got it perfect, except for this one kid. And that moment is kind of in The Hero of Ages, as our academic researcher, record keeper character continues to dig into religion and find some kind of truth in it all. A lot of authors put themselves into a character, typically the protagonist, but I'd put money on this character being Sanderson, at least in part. And his obsession with religion seems to be pretty healthy, very accepting, very curious in an open-minded way, in spite of the fact that Sanderson himself belongs to a church that is widely regarded to be a dangerous, racist, sexist cult. And I find that really, really interesting. Again, I might do a full video talking about this, but I need to do more research into him and Mormonism first, because his relationship to Mormonism doesn't stack up to his relationship to religion as it's explored in this trilogy. And I do not have the bandwidth and I have not done the research to talk about it here and now, but I'd like to. So many fantasy authors develop a magic system, develop a physical world, and develop a religion or tradition in their books. And that religion might be reminiscent of something that we know. It might be a religion with a pantheon of real gods that really exist and we know they exist, like in Greek or Norse mythology. It might be a religion based in the faith that people have in a creator, like in the Abrahamic religions. And there are other things besides, like Shintoism and Buddhism inspiring different authors' writings. Sanderson's approach to religion is all and none of that. And I am so fascinated by it, so a separate video is going to come. But religion aside, as I said at the beginning, what makes the Mistborn trilogy so compelling is the way in which Sanderson does not rest on what is established early on. He builds as much of the world as you need to understand in order to have a foothold in it and follow the protagonists forward as they go on this righteous mission. And then he opens things up. He asks and answers different questions about the status quo, about the politics and the geography and the history and the traditions. You are never done learning about this world, its people, and its histories. Curiosity and experimentation. These are the things that guide his hand throughout this trilogy. And that's what makes each book feel unique, as if they all belong to different subgenres. The Mistborn trilogy is a true journey. A journey across different landscapes. A journey in which you change as our protagonists change, as their goals and missions change, as they get older, their relationships change. They win things and lose things. They win people and lose people. And you change along with them. I read this trilogy over the course of 3 months, one book each month. And I feel different having read them. I feel like I went on 3 distinct journeys through the lives of people, through political machinations, and through religion, history, and culture. And I am utterly amazed by what Sanderson has achieved with this trilogy. If you've never read it, it really is something impressive. And I fully agree that Mistborn is exactly as celebrated as it deserves to be. It is a sensation of a trilogy within the fantasy genre, and now that I've read it, I understand why. Mistborn really is that good. I really hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned for way more fantasy content and subscribe for books.